Well, what a day this has been for Australia. And you know the old saying, $10 billion here, $10 billion there. Pretty soon, you're talking about real money. Although not as much real money as the trillion-dollar mountain of debt Australia is hurtling towards. This morning, hours before both Labor and the Coalition officially launched their campaigns, Australians woke to the news that both sides were going to dangle all sorts of new housing and tax goodies in their direction, hoping, just hoping and praying that you'll go out there and vote for them in a few weeks' time. Now, the Coalition put it out there that they would allow first home buyers to deduct their mortgage interest if they earned within a certain income range and bought a new build home. The only catch was that, that policy is not going to be available until 25-26 and will cost something on the order of $10 billion, while, of course, pumping up the housing market, which might not actually be so good for, first home buyers. But, cha-ching, Labor was right there with their own drop to the papers this morning, and they announced that, among other things, should they come back to power, they would let first home buyers get into the market with just a 5% deposit. And hey, what could go wrong there? As part of their cradle-to-grave involvement in everything you do at every stage in your life, they would also effectively go guarantor with purchasers, covering their mortgage insurance. But, hey, wait a second. Unlike the Coalition's policy, Labor's policy won't do anything to inflate the housing market. And how do we know? Because Housing Minister Claire O'Neil told us so.
Just to be clear, is the Treasury modelling on this idea that it won't impact house prices?
It won't have a significant impact on house prices.
Not a significant impact?
That's
is that
correct.
A small impact?
It's not a significant impact on house prices for the reasons that I've just explained.
Did you know that the ABC had brought back Clark and Daw? That sure sounded like it to me.
This ship that was involved in the incident off Western Australia this week...
Yeah, the one the front fell off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not very typical. I'd like to make that point.
Well, how is it untypical?
Well, there are a lot of these ships going around the world all the time, and very seldom does anything like this happen. I just don't want people thinking that tankers aren't safe.
Was this tanker safe?
Well, I was thinking more about the other ones.
Sorry, but of course, if we couldn't laugh, we'd have to cry given the current state of things. And yes, of course, this housing policy, like every other policy to drive demand, will absolutely, by necessity, inflate the housing market. So well done to all involved. But of course, neither side, neither the Coalition nor Labor, were done yet. Peter Dutton, having looked at the Coalition's tax reform policies and found them a bit, shall we say, wanting. I mean, that fuel excise discount is wonderful for families and tradies and those of us who tool around in a big, thirsty V8. Well, he decided they needed a little more, so he decided to up the ante with a new tax policy of his own.
Today, I announce a significant tax cut to help Australians who are suffering the most egregious time. And I say that advisedly. When we've spoken with families and sitting around those tables, people really are under stress. So we're going to cut the tax that Labor's imposed, and we're going to help with Labor's cost of living crisis. A coalition government will deliver a one-off cost of living tax offset. This will reduce the amount of tax paid by millions of Australians, and it will be up to $1,200. Around 85% of all Australian taxpayers will be eligible for and will benefit from this reduction in tax. This will help people when they need help. These tax cuts will save families with two incomes as much as $2,400.
Well, that's a bit of reheated leftovers there, because that's a reheating, essentially, of the old low to middle-income tax offsets of the Morrison years. And, I mean, great, good, frankly, but frankly, the Coalition, the side of politics that has always been about lower taxes, has, I've got to say, this campaign really squibbed it with its tax policies so far, presumably because they fear that any effort at real reform will leave them accused of pandering to the wealthy, or the top end of town, as they like to say in the papers. And they don't have the stomach, then, for a conversation about Australia's massive over-reliance on personal income tax, disproportionately paid by higher income earners. Now, Labor's 70 cents a day tax cuts are appallingly small, but they do give Labor one little edge, and that is the fact that they can now say that they are giving a tax cut to every Australian. Well, thanks for almost nothing, Albo. But there was some other Labor tax policy, including an automatic $1,000 deduction and credit where credit is due. This makes tax compliance a lot easier for a lot of people and essentially gives everyone a $1,000 deduction. Good for them, but I guess we'll have to wait, though, for some future campaign to do something really bold like index our tax rates to inflation, or get rid of that 37% income tax bracket that punishes achievers as they move up through the ranks of income earners, or even deal with a top tax bracket that was only adjusted up to $190,000 a year in 2024 from $180,000 a year, where it had sat since 2008, when $180,000 was a lot more money than it is today. In fact, it's about $291,000 in today's dollars. Because, hey, this year, both parties are instead trying to just buy your vote with your money. Yeah, I am a little cynical about all this. But that said, today we also did see some important differences in philosophy and style between the two campaigns, even if their tax and housing policies really do just amount to more sugar hits. Well, their real philosophies of government, they remain, I think, pretty different. And this difference was highlighted in the approach of the two sides on a variety of issues, such as education. Here's Peter Dutton.
A coalition government is committed to ensuring that classrooms are places of education, not indoctrination. For our children's future, we want Australia's education system to return to being among the world's best. We've seen promising improvements in schools which are focused on teaching the basics of reading, of writing and arithmetic, and where concepts are explained and practiced. And in that circumstance, young minds can grow. And it's those curriculums that cultivate critical thinking, responsible citizenship, and common sense, and reflect the expectations and values of parents that must once again become the norm, and under our government they will.
By contrast, here was Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at the Labor campaign launch in Perth.
Like so much else, the Liberals, when we promised this, said it couldn't be done. And after 14 years ago, my friend Julia Gillard commissioned the Gonski Review, setting the national standard for every Australian child in every Australian school to get the best education, not just for themselves, but for what that contributes to the nation. We have signed up every single state and territory to deliver the funding and reform to reach that goal.
You see the difference? You see, with Anthony Albanese, he is still stuck in the old belief that money equals outcomes when it comes to education. And yet we all know that's not always the case. Meanwhile, as far as the curriculum goes, well, according to Labor, that's just a culture war. Here's Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles introducing the Prime Minister and talking about Peter Dutton.
He has been far too busy taking his cues from other countries, from cuts and culture wars that have no place here.
Ah, yes, the American bogeyman. There was more, too. And throughout, in fact, the entire Labor launch, there was a near obsession with Donald Trump, although they never said his name, and the United States and not being like them. No, the big meanies. Yet, while they did talk a lot about standing up for Australia and Australian values, I could not believe this line from Western Australian Premier Roger Cook at the start of the launch.
They abandoned diplomacy with our top trading partner, China, in favour of aggressive rhetoric. This, of course, culminated in a legacy of Chinese tariffs against beef, barley, wine, timber and crayfish. As an export state, it was an appalling experience. Relationships that took years to build being trashed at the expense of local industries and local WA jobs. But over the last 3 years, Bit by bit, the Albanese government has restored diplomatic relations. And at the same time, they've delivered cost of living relief to help Australians to weather the global inflationary crisis.
Did you get a load of that? Chinese tariffs on Australia? Well, they're our fault, obviously. Not the fault of the communist totalitarian regime in Beijing. I thought that this was absolutely extraordinary and really, I've got to say, really out of line. I mean, seriously, Scott Morrison, when he was Prime Minister, was one of the few leaders around the world to stand up, and he did so very honorably to China when it came to the origins of the COVID pandemic, and to stand up to China's abusive wolf warrior diplomacy. It was the right thing to do. It was the right thing for Australia to do, and it was the right thing for Scott Morrison to do, even if it cost him votes in heavily Chinese-Australian seats in places like Sydney's North Shore. And even though he spoke before the Labor event took place, Peter Dutton, at his launch in Western Sydney, seemed to anticipate that Roger Cook's line was coming.
And I can promise Australians this too. The coalition government will call out and deter acts of aggressive military activities that threaten our sovereignty and our defence personnel, our country and the region's stability. And we will do this in concert with our partners. Self-censorship is a price no self-respecting democracy should ever pay. And I will always stand up for our national interest.
Bang on, Mr. Dutton. That is what standing up for Australia looks like, not what Roger Cook was saying there. Now, we may not be having the real conversations about debt and housing and tax and the economy that we really need this year, but I will say this: when it comes to real existential matters of national security and national sovereignty, it is pretty clear who sits on which side of the fence.